अस्सलाम वालेकुम and good afternoon everyone. बहुत शुक्रिया आप लोगों के आने का आज. We've got a very interesting panel for you guys on the climate march that is happening on Friday the 20th. So that's what we're here for, right? That's what we're here for, to understand what this whole thing is about. So मेरा नाम है डॉक्टर इमरान खालिद. I head the Environment and Climate Change program here at SDPI. Or before I come to the panelists, just want to highlight how climate change is impacting Pakistan. 2010 के जो floods हैं वो perhaps हमारे लिए एक बहुत बड़ा clear sign है कि जी climate change जिस तरीके से हम पर impact हो रहा है. Floods तो हमेशा यहाँ पे आते रहे हैं, droughts भी आते रहे हैं, लेकिन जिस intensity से अभी आ रहे हैं, the intensity that we're feeling right now, that's mainly due to the impacts of climate change. And we see that the floods are happening more and more. They're recurrent. We're finding that they're happening more frequently. There's a threat of glacial lake outburst floods up in the north. There are heat waves happening in Karachi on a more frequent basis than ever before. We're feeling the communities and the people who are poor, who are economically vulnerable, they're going to be more impacted by climate change. So in this regard, climate change really does have a high significance for the policymakers and decision makers in the country, and it is for that purpose Pakistan is joining the Climate March on 20th, and it will try and be part of a movement to alter the status quo. And what is that status quo? We will come to the panels, we'll talk to them, and we'll find out why each one of these young individuals is participating in this event on the 20th. It's happening on the 20th at 3 p.m. It'll start at the Islamabad Press Club, and then we'll walk to the D Chowk from there. So let me just quickly introduce the panelists here. We've got Qasim Tareen, who's a progressive organic farmer, and has set up not only in Islamabad, but also in Karachi, and we'll hear more about what motivated him to take this up and why it's important in terms of what we are talking about today. Next to him is the renowned environmental journalist Raina Saeed, who's written a number of books and publishes regularly on environment and climate change issues. We've got Iqbal Badruddin with us, who is coordinating lead organizer for the Fridays for Future movement. This is the movement that was started by Greta Thunberg, the Swedish girl who's in the news a lot these days. And the movement that she started has come to Pakistan, and Iqbal is working on that front. And last but not least, we've got Anam Rathore with us, who's an environment and social organizer. She's a climate reality leader and is helping bring all of us together in this regard. So let's begin with Raina. Raina, before we go to the others, I'd just like you to highlight why this is so important. Why is it that we need to meet? We've got a climate change policy already. We've got a climate change ministry. Isn't the government doing enough?
So actually, let me just start by saying that what we are going to be doing on the 20th is in solidarity with the global movement. It's called the Global Action Week, and it has been called by Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish schoolgirl, who is right now in New York. And what's happening in New York is that from 20th of September to 27th of September, there is going to be a UN General Assembly meeting. And all the world leaders have been specially invited for this meeting by the UN Secretary General, whose name is Antonio Guterres, who's taken it on himself that to become like an advocate for climate action. So, you've heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Goal number 13 is climate action on countering climate change and its impacts, which are being felt now every single country in the world. every single community is being impacted. Even the United States, whose president tried to pull out of the Paris Agreement and who says he doesn't really believe in climate change. Even in the US right now, there was a huge hurricane Dorian, and there's been tornadoes. I mean, even the US is now bearing the brunt of climate change. So no country will be spared, whether it's the West or it's the South where we are. So this call has been called for global citizens all over the world to come out on the streets in every city almost. I think over 120 countries. Students, young people. It's primarily a youth-led. And we have a youth representative right here who we will hear from. Yeah, I hope so. But we're helping them because what the Swedish schoolgirl has called, she's asked for adults to join in, and because it was a youth movement that started, basically young people all over the world started coming out of school and saying we don't really have a future. And why are they saying this? Because this is what the scientists say. So this is not really something you either believe in or you don't believe in, like Trump. It is a fact. And what the scientists tell us, and these are global scientists, and IPCC is an intergovernmental panel on climate change set up by the United Nations, scientists from all over the world, more than 2,500 scientists, and they all just brought out a report earlier this year called the Special Report on Global Warming, or 1.5 degrees, which basically tries to tell citizens and people and governments and businesses and corporations all over the world that right now we are at 1 degree of warming, and you can see what's happening in the world with the wildfires, the droughts, the flooding, the hurricanes, the sea level rising, the polar caps melting, the glaciers melting. So imagine at 1.5, it's going to just get worse. But that is what the governments under the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change, we have decided globally, and Pakistan, I say we because Pakistan already also has signed the Paris Agreement, so we are also, as a responsible country, signatory to this international agreement, that we will try to curb our emissions, even though our emissions are negligible, but we're high on suffering. We suffer from climate change, but we did not cause it, but still, because we are a responsible country and we signed this international agreement, we have also agreed to reduce our emissions. And the scientists tell us that we just have 12 years left, and by 2030 we will hit 1.5, and as you know, emissions are not reducing. So 12 saal reh gaye hain, time, the window is shutting, and we don't want to go to 2 degrees, because imagine at 1 degree all this is happening, what's going to happen at 2 degrees? And scientists say beyond 2 degrees, and it's the end of our civilization as we know it. The planet will survive, but the way we live our lives will be, it's going to be a very different world, a very dark world, where you can just guess riots, climate migration, fights over food. We don't really want to go there. We want to try and save our civilization and the way we live our lives, and so we call it a low carbon future. And all the countries are transitioning. What Greta is saying, it needs to happen faster. What the young people are saying is, don't mess up our future. You've already messed up the planet, and when by the time we get our jobs and we become adults, we're not really going to have much of a world, not a very pleasant world to live in. So that's what this call is for, to wake up everybody and make it a global movement, to demand our political leaders who are going to be going to New York, including Imran Khan, including Modi, including all the other prime ministers and presidents, that please, like, the political leaders, do something before it's too late.
What are the objectives of the march? What's our demand?
Yeah, so actually, Fridays for Future International is something very different from Fridays for Future Pakistan, and this is what we already discussed with Greta and her father when we started this campaign. They were asking us for doing some big strikes and sending them videos, and we told them that the level of awareness in the Western countries is really different. It's really upside down if you compare it with the South Asian country. So the total difference comes in because when we went to different youth, when I quote them, like school student teenagers, when we told them about climate change, we asked them what is climate change. They didn't have any knowledge about what is climate change. So we went to universities and asked them, we want to do something to show a soft image of Pakistan, that yes, Pakistani kids are also a part of this global movement, and we, because of German Watch report, we are one of the most vulnerable countries. But the alarming things came to up was that even the university students, most of them didn't know what is climate change. Even if they do know, they don't know about the technicalities, like basic technicalities of mitigation adaptation. So we actually skipped the college school students, because the notion of skipping Friday's class is will not work in Pakistan. European countries are educational economies. They can actually try to tell the government that we won't go to school if you don't do anything about our future. But if we ask anyone to skip their classes, they would have said no. So we started this campaign, how putting our demands. Our first demand from the government when we met government officials was to actually add a climate change related curriculum to the small kid schools. We started from, even from KG class, put some basic, rhyme, something that, pitch their minds. So when I used to read, I don't remember if I ever heard about climate change or even environment till my 10th grade. So this was our first demand, to add something up in curriculum so that individual behaviors can actually fight the climate change. The second thing was that, yeah, we can actually do demonstration in every universities and every institutions to, spread awareness, because people come and ask, what are you doing? Then we tell them that yes, we are doing this. We are actually participating in a global campaign, which is Fridays for Future, and it's related to climate change. So we were very short of our demands because the basic thing was not there. So the room there was to, inform them. We need to inform ourselves what is actually climate change, what is actually adaptation and mitigation means, and what actually fits for Pakistan, like adaptation. So we started it a year ago, and then we were doing it. We started with one university, that was Iqra University in Islamabad, and we went on to 15, 16 universities in Islamabad, and then we added different cities of Pakistan. The best thing we got in our idea was that yes, by doing demonstrations on Friday for and 30 minutes or an hour, that added so much value to our campaign that now we don't even want to inform or ask anyone to demonstrate. They do it by themselves. They actually have sessions on Friday for 15 to 30 minutes. Even if they are demonstrating, if someone comes and asks, they actually tell them about what is climate change, how can we inform us and our parents about how we can contribute positively into mitigating it. So these were the demands, but as time passing by, Pakistan is getting more vulnerable to this type of severe conditions. We are now asking international governments and leaders to actually fulfill their promises. Even till now, what we are seeing is that how United States acting on the Paris Agreement, we might not be able to achieve and get the funding we need, because as a developing country, we will be getting funding. But I think rather than, it's a good idea of billion tree tsunami and 10 billion tree tsunami, but I don't think that this is enough. We can plant trees, but how would we, sowing the seeds in the minds of the people that we have to save our planet rather than planting trees? We have to change our actions. So we are demanding the government to, take some strict actions, because our generation, the coming generation, we don't want them to be, rather than being kids and doing something like we are doing nowadays, we want them to play and have a very good future. So till now, we actually demand for awareness, climate literacy, and we think that we will be doing this for quite a long time, because the situation would get change anytime sooner for what we have anticipated. So yeah, we are primarily focusing on awareness.
You're primarily focused on awareness. Uh, Anam, you've spent time in the US as well. There is this talk of a Green New Deal there, but at the same time, you've got the Trump administration, which has promised to get out of the Paris Agreement. Now, the US is one of the largest contributors to the greenhouse gases. If the US comes out and it's not doing its part, then Pakistanis can say, look, you're not doing your part, why should we do it? At least that's the argument. How do you respond to that?
I think I've actually heard that argument. Like when there were talks about the offshore drilling in Sindh, Karachi ke paas, so I was like, we shouldn't invest in projects like that. Instead, go to renewable. And a lot of people were like, our carbon production, like I think everyone said that to me that our carbon production is so low and we need that. So they're like, there are times when you can't argue, and because if you look at it realistically, our carbon production is less than 0.1% all over the world ko hum dekhein, but we are number 7 in the world most affected by climate change. So even if we go to zero or negative, we'll still be affected by climate change. Like if the whole Pakistan is covered by trees, and we're just taking climate from the carbon from the atmosphere, we'll still be affected. So it's like we have to tell people okay, how it, because there was a research recently that, and you mentioned that most people don't know what climate change is, how it is affecting them. Like they can't associate the heat waves happening in Karachi that they are because of climate change. We have a dengue outbreak right now. There was like in DHQ hospital Pindi, there's so many people there that they're out of beds in wards. And how is dengue is because of climate change. It's a tropical disease. It has spread to Pakistan because the temperature has increased and the mosquito has moved from tropical regions. So we need to tell people how climate change is actually affecting their lives. As you said, climate literacy is very low, so people can't make the connection. Like if you look at the top 10 issues of Pakistan, there's illiteracy, there's poverty. People, if you don't have food at home, or if you don't, like can't send your kids to school, you can't like make that relationship of how climate is affecting you. So I feel like making the connection of how all of these things are associated with climate change, how it is affecting the life of everyday person, only then we can make them we have to take a stand. And especially as you said, there are like 100 companies in the world that make up 70% of all the carbon pollution. So and they are like, so capitalism is a big thing. They're the rich people. When climate change, like if we have a flood, or they always affect low income communities. They affect like countries like Pakistan or countries where people of color live. When people like rich people, if they're not being affected, if there's a storm, if there's a lot of rain, they're in their house. Even in Pakistan, and we're not walking on roads when there floods. When there's a heat wave, we sit in ACs. So if the rich people are not going to raise their voice, because nobody's going to listen. So even in the US, we have to make the people who are making the policies. But the good thing about there is, especially elected officials, they the state thing is like they're elected every 2 years, and their election policy is very clear. So people, if they're like if we elected you, if you're not going to make a policy change, we won't elect you in 2 years. So the Green New Deal thing is, it's a youth movement. What people are doing, students are actually going to their representative's office outside and saying, you support the Green New Deal. So because of that, a lot of people are. In Pakistan, we can't do that, but what we can do is, we need our government support, because if someone has to talk at the UN, we want our government representative to take our stories there, to convince them. So one thing is that I have seen, if you look at organizing perspective, there's a thing called digital storytelling. I think you've all heard of Humans of New York. Like that's what digital. So if we can convince those people, the policymakers or people who elect them in the US or in developed countries, about digital storytelling, them listening that how the carbon that they're producing, or all their lifestyle, how it is affecting people in the global south, like how a farmer who's lost, like they've lost their land. I saw a documentary in which like there was a man who was a farmer, and he was married for a few years. He only had two kids. One was 3 and one was 4, and he died because of heat wave. He passed away. And then the wife was telling the story a year later, and how difficult life has been for her. So if we bring stories like these, forward, that how all of this is affecting these, like how it affecting the life of people, how people are dying of heat wave, how all of their, like in floods, their homes are destroyed, their families are destroyed. So I think that's one way, especially countries like us can maybe convince people in countries like US or in Europe to make stronger policies on climate change, because as you said, our climate change policy is not even going to make a dent in the world carbon production.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Anam. Um, so that's why we're here. We're also telling our own little stories, and so the stories that Anam just mentioned about floods and heat waves, these are one part. But then there are some positive stories out there as well, and Qasim's story is one of those. It's a very positive story. It's a story that perhaps can be taken up by others. So Qasim, tell us what makes you interested in terms of walking on the 20th, first of all, and then follow that up by talking about your initiatives vis-a-vis organic farming and how do you see climate change impacting it in the future.
Thank you, Imran. So I'd said earlier in one of my videos that we had posted online about why I'm marching is related to two recent reports. One, Raina already mentioned, which was the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change report, their special report for policymakers that focuses a lot on land management. So the better essentially use of land to make sure that we have food security for an increasing population. That's one of the reports. And then one report that's a lot more local and I think a lot more relevant to us, and one of the things that I've noticed also on a personal basis was a recent report that Dawn did, a very good investigative article on the activities of Beria town in Sindh. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle where if you have large real estate or large corporations going and reducing natural resources in agricultural areas, so much so that agriculture at the small scale no longer becomes viable and doesn't remain viable. A very practical example is if a cement company goes into an area and starts mining for sand and gravel, they can reduce the water table in that area drastically. So what happened in Sindh, outside of Karachi in the Malir and Jamshoro areas, was that because of this Reti Bajri mining, the water table fell from 40 feet to 200 feet. Now that has catastrophic consequences, especially for small farmers who are paying for through their noses already for electricity or diesel pumps to pump water. Because here is a person who is pumping water from 40 feet has now got to start pumping water from 200 feet. So what that happens is that it makes small scale agriculture not practical and not viable. So what does he do? He then can no longer earn a living. So the small farmer then sells his land to a large corporation, something like a real estate company, for peanuts. So that these two reports are, in my opinion, very closely linked. Land management, which again has been recommended at an international level as being the most important thing, and this Dawn investigative piece where you have very valuable agricultural land now coming under concrete, essentially. So I really wanted to talk about these 2 points first before getting into farming, and again how important it is for us to adopt more sustainable agricultural practices. So because it's, farms and land management and forests, they are essentially carbon sinks. Soil can absorb carbon, it can sequester carbon, so can trees. So much so that they say that forests and land resources can absorb 1/3 of all of fossil fuels' greenhouse gas emissions, all of them. So that's how important it is to have healthy soils and forests. And healthy soil is a very large part of sustainable agriculture. what I started doing about 6 years ago was was organic farming, very close to Islamabad, in a place called Pind Bhagwal on Simli Dam Road. And one of the first things that I noticed when I used to drive to our farm, it's a family farm, was that there were very large real estate housing societies coming up in these areas. One is Bahria Enclave, and the other one is another one called Park View. Both are very have very strong political connections, have very deep pockets, and they were buying land at peanuts and converting it into essentially plazas and houses. So this I see in land that's happening maybe 20 kilometers from where we are sitting right now. So this was my everyday drive to and from the farm, which already, it gave me more motivation really to, because I knew that the more we squander these precious resources, the more precious they're going to become. So sustaining agricultural practices on our small farm, which is just 7 acres, we did through building greenhouses, tunnels, having more efficient land water, more efficient use of water, because water in that area is scarce. It's again a very valuable resource. Better farmyard manure management, better soil management practices like soil rotation, crop rotation. And then most importantly, for a small farmer like me, I could not go to the mandi. I could not go and sell what I'm producing on a small scale at wholesale prices. So me and a few people got together in Islamabad and started a farmers market. Now, farmers markets are very important because they create communities. They not only enable farmers to sell directly to consumers, but again, for a lot of homemade and small scale businesses to access consumers that they couldn't access, especially in places like Islamabad, where it's becoming prohibitively expensive to do business if you're a small enterprise. So that was in 2013. I'm very grateful also to Kuch Khas, the community center, that provided us the space at the time to do so. And then in 2015, we started the same thing in Karachi at a school. And it's currently still at a school in Phase 8, where, if anybody's familiar with Karachi, it used to be where the Itwar Bazaar was, a very popular bazaar in DHA, which wasn't just for DHA residents, but for the entire population of Karachi. Of course, DHA Phase 8 at that time was completely empty. Now, if you go to DHA Phase 8 in Karachi, it's filled with houses. And obviously, one of the first things that they stopped once all these big houses started being made in that area was they kicked Itwar Bazaar out. So both these enterprises, again, have gotten a very positive response from the community, and really it is about creating communities, because those are what will help us sustain, and sustainable agricultural practices are the future. Climate change affects farmers, it affects all of us. Like we had said earlier, Pakistan is one of the 7th most affected countries of climate change, even though we're not, I think we're the 31st or the 32nd as far as it comes to greenhouse emissions. But all the climate change sort of tipping points are going to be in 20, 30 years from now. Sorry, 130. All the all the sort of climate change tipping points we hear about are going to be in 20, 30 years. So I was having this conversation earlier with my wife today. I said, how old are we going to be in 2050, and how old are our children going to be in 2050? So it's very much a movement about the generations to come, and it's about taking timely action to ensure that the generations to come have the same kind of resources we have, and if not, maybe something better. I was just comparing it to, if you borrow something from somebody, you usually tend to give it back to them in better state than you've taken it from them. But I hope we can do the same thing with our planet for the coming generations. That if not in a better state, at least give it to them in the same state that we got it in. So yes.
Thank you, Qasim, for that insight, and how you talked about what's happening on the ground. Cities are coming up, and when you do that and you're putting concrete out there, it's creating heat islands, and that's why we see heat waves happening more and more in these cities, because we're taking away the green spaces. And then when you talked about the Itwar Bazaar and the livelihoods that are associated with it, that's going away. So climate change will, at the end of the day, it's a social justice issue. Those with you know, who're sitting in air-conditioned rooms and driving air-conditioned cars will probably perhaps not feel it the same way as people whose livelihoods are really dependent on these day-to-day things that are going to be impacted by climate change. But Raina, now let me come to you, and this is a debate that we keep having. You know me, I'm very pessimistic about where we're heading. I don't think so. Just to give you a brief overview, we've talked about it, but at this time we are at 1 degree temperature rise as compared to pre-industrial levels. Uh, Sir, it's 1.1, so it's about one. That means if I have a presentation, I usually like to put up the Badshahi Mosque and then say, because that was around the 17th century mark when that came up. So since then, the temperature rise is about 1 degrees. In the next 10 or 12 years, by 2030, will go up by 0.5 degrees. By 2050, we're reaching 2 degrees of temperature rise. So with 1 degree of temperature rise, you can see, with the floods that we're having, the heat waves, Dorian, the typhoons in India and Bangladesh, the heat waves in Europe, and the droughts in Pakistan, the glacial lake outburst floods. So all of these things are happening at 1 degree. So imagine what's going to happen at 2 degrees. So the 1.5C report, it has so many different examples. So one of the examples is that at 1.5C, the Arctic will open up. The Arctic, which is now covered with sea, will open up perhaps, yes, by ice, perhaps once every 10 years. But if it's at 2 degrees, it will all melt. So it will just be open. The coral reefs will die off at 2 degrees. So this is a major threat. These are indicators. These are the tipping points that Qasim mentioned. And my contention is that with the world, well, people are taking up renewable energy, but they're also continuing their use of coal power plants. We are doing the same thing here in Pakistan. Over the past 4 or 5 years, our energy supplies have gotten better because of coal power plants, and there are more that are going to be produced. So we have this discussion about whether the renewable energy projects will come up by 2030, but I'm very pessimistic whether we'll even be able to do anything about this.
I'll just speak specifically about Pakistan. We have a new renewable energy policy that's going to be, it's already being presented to the cabinet, and different stakeholders have sort of discussed it, and it should be out this year. And that, the minister told me that in that policy, they see by 2030 is 65% renewables. So 35% from hydropower and 30% from solar, wind, sugarcane. When you convert sugarcane into energy, it's called bagas, or so from there, and other forms of renewable energy that they're looking at. So it's a it's a policy that they have come up with, so they feel that they can meet its targets. Of course, hydropower, there's a question of dams, and if they're not good for the environment, so we won't go into that, but 65% is a pretty good target. As for the coal power plants, this is the Minister for Climate Change, Malik Amin Aslam. Actually, his technical name is advisor to the PM on climate change, and he assured me that no new coal power plants are being commissioned. The ones that are being constructed now are the ones that were agreed to by the last government, and he said we cannot cancel them because there's sovereignty issues, and they're with China, because actually no Western bank will give you money now, or no Western country will actually give you money now to build a coal power plant, because coal is the dirtiest fuel in the world, and it is going to be phased out by the Paris Agreement. So this is what the government tells us. Of course, there is an argument that the ones that have been commissioned already should not even they should not be built because they'll become stranded assets, because renewables, as you know, is becoming cheaper and cheaper. Solar panels, the prices are falling every year. So many homes, people are like now, because of high electricity bills, so many people are now converting to solar energy, and they're doing it on their own without any, government incentive or, I mean, there is a feedback. You can now sell your electricity back to the grid. So reverse metering, they call it, net metering started now in Islamabad and in Lahore, in the big cities. So there is that issue that, the thing is that it is happening. Renewable energy all over the world is becoming much cheaper than coal even. It's becoming cheaper in many cases than gas. Wind energy in the Scandinavian countries, now they've switched. Sweden gets most of its energy from wind energy, wind turbines. So it is happening, it's just not happening fast enough. The window is closing, and the experts are worried, the scientists are worried. The United States is the big, I guess we call it the elephant in the room at all the negotiations because of Trump. But there are going to be elections next year. Let's see if President Trump is re-elected. We don't know what's going to happen. It is the U.S. right now that is acting as a major barrier to these negotiations. I think European Union is on board. So 15 countries, 15 countries, and including the European Union as one large territory, are the ones that have caused 90% of the emissions. So these are the 15 countries, and this is Russia, India, China, Brazil, European Union, the USA, and so on, and Japan, and we're not in those 15. Our emissions are really negligible. But so the pressure is on these economies to really go for renewables. They have then India has this issue of like we're developing as well in many ways. They have a lot of people who are still in poverty. Chinese make the same argument at these talks that our per capita emissions are lower than the US. The US has the highest per capita. So there's these arguments back and forth. It's a very technical process. It's very painstaking. But people say, like, we have people in our group even who say that the Paris Agreement is rubbish and it won't achieve anything. But for me, who's been following these negotiations globally, it's the best bet we have. The UN system is still, tell me the alternative. And I say, what is the alternative? They say the overthrow of the capitalist system. But that would cause a lot of chaos. And short of this sort of, this is the only sort of the global way of doing this is to go through the negotiations. They are stalled right now, but the Paris Agreement is not operational as yet. It will become operational in 2020. So we're right now doing the homework. We're trying to make the structure. And this year in Santiago, in Chile, I hope to be there. Let's see. Greta Thunberg is right now in New York. She will be coming to Santiago by boat, and there are going to be huge protests, and I think they're going to be global protests. In fact, that's why we're also encouraging our citizens to come out on the 20th to show solidarity. And there is going to be immense pressure that's going to be put on the negotiators. Right now in New York, there's going to be immense pressure that's going to be put on the political leaders. So we hope that the Paris Agreement is strengthened. It ramps up its ambition. Right now, it's not going to meet its targets. But I don't think we can give up hope. We still have 12 years, and 11, 2030. We still have 11 years to meet at least 1.5, and 2 degrees is. So I just want to go back to just one point about how do you tackle climate change. There are 2 ways, right? There's mitigation, and then there's adaptation. So just a little to make it clear, mitigation is what can you do to prevent it. So switch to renewable energy, and adaptation is okay. It's already happening now. What do you do to prevent floods? To prevent, not really, you can't prevent the floods, but you can become climate proof. And a country that keeps coming up in the talks, and it's I have to say that they're doing an amazing job. And they're not a rich country. They're actually. And well, they were an LDC until I don't know what the exact is Bangladesh. And Bangladesh gets very severe cyclones every year. almost. And what they've done is that they have weatherproofed their country. So the cyclone will come, but nobody loses their livestock. No lives are lost. They've got plans right down to the district level. Even school children in Bangladesh, they have early warning systems. They know where to go. They know how to escape. They know. So what my so again in our discussions with Imran and other people, what my feeling is that Pakistan, because our emissions are negligible, but and then we live in a city where air pollution is beginning to become a problem, but it's one of the better cities to live in. I understand for people in Lahore and people in Peshawar, and air pollution is a huge issue. I mean, it's really damaging their lungs, and it's creating so many health problems. But for us, I think we're slightly better off. And I understand why emissions is such an issue for them, because if you clean up your carbon emissions, you clean up air pollution. But I think Pakistan really needs to focus on better adaptation. And even I think Imran agrees with me on this, that we don't have early warning systems in place. We don't know when the floods are going to come. It's always about flood rescue. There's never talk about flood prevention, in the sense that, okay, you can't stop the floods, but how can you protect your settlements and your fields and we don't really have I mean, yes, the Billion Tree Tsunami is an excellent project in the sense that it's getting global recognition. In fact, on the 23rd of September in New York, Malik Amin Aslam will be presenting Pakistan's example. He's been invited to present it on a panel, Champions of Nature panel, and they're going to be talking about how they achieved the Billion Tree and the 10 billion tree, how they will be achieving it. And so we are getting global recognition. So planting trees, again, their carbon sinks, and they also prevent floods, and they not prevent floods, but they help when you have bad floods, especially in the mountain areas. So that is one project that we can show to the world, but much more needs to be done. Mangrove plantation, Pakistan's planting mangroves. We need to plant more to protect our coastal areas, and heat waves. Simple thing like a new report just came out. It's called the GCA, Global Commission on Adaptation. And these are little things like painting your roofs white. If you paint your roof white, you'll reflect the sunlight back, and you will keep your house warmer. So these are really low cost. I mean, Bangladesh, like I said, not a rich country. These are all low cost measures, and we really need to be tackling them. And really, I think the government should really, tell its citizens very seriously what's going to happen, and it's going to be happening very soon. It already is happening, and what can we do to protect ourselves? So it's in our self-interest to protect ourselves.
So, thank you, Ryan, and a really good point regarding adaptation, because that's what we'll need to do, and I definitely agree with you, because I don't think we'll be able to stay below 2 degrees by 2050, and that means we'll have to deal with the floods and the droughts and the heat waves, and a lot of these things will be happening concurrently within this country. So that means we really need to focus on proactive measures. So rather than a lot of the money that's going to the NDMA, which is the National Disaster Management Agency or Authority, and it's a reactive process, right? So a flood happens and then you respond to it. But what can we do to go to the people right now and ask them what their needs are? If you go to the farmers, and we've done a study in Dera Ghazi Khan and Chang, and we talk to them, they might not know about the term climate change, but they definitely know that the weather patterns are changing. They know that the cropping patterns are being affected. So that's what we really need to do, and start using the universities and the research institutes that we have, and going down to the ground level and getting people's input. So Iqbal, now to you. You've heard the discussion so far. The march is happening on the 20th, but what are we going to do after that? Do we just go back, or what's Fridays for Future going to do? How are you going to interact with Climate Action Now, the network that's been developed?
So this 20th March and also 27th, like Greta only strike on Fridays. So this is a good sign that this march and the way it has been prepared, it has been given attention on media, and I've been reading so many articles from the last week about this. So this would have done before. This could have been done before, and I think the way we are awaiting people now, we need to triple it down to, I think, 100 or more than that times, because marching this is a very common thing in Pakistan. You're gonna see every Friday marching for Kashmir and stuff. So I guess many people will just ignore it, even without reading it. So I think if we start injecting this climate change literacy thing from the beginning of a child who's gonna go for education, that might comes up, whenever he's in his higher education, that might change something in his life and in his surroundings. So after this march, I think we are actually we are not demanding anything from our government till now, because we thinks that the international government, the global government is not doing enough. Pakistan has been affected more and giving is a less emitter if compared to other countries. So what we are demanding is like we cannot mitigate it. It's very much resourceful and we don't have resource. What we can do is we have asked the minister too, and we have asked whoever we have met with different MNAs of Islamabad and even in Punjab, that they should try. They those are the people that people are looking upon. Where people are expecting that they are going to do something better for their constituency jurisdiction. So how about coming up with something which is pro climate? People will listen, and till now we have got very good response from especially the member national assemblies of Islamabad, like NA 52, 53, that those people, MNAs, are very concerned about what's happening in their constituency, like in Chak Shahzad and those areas. The Raja Khurram Nawaz, who is the member National Assembly of that place, he is very concerned about what's happening in his area, because the level of trash is coming out every day. People are not aware how to, use proper footpaths, proper dustbins and stuff. So he also agrees that yes, funding and doing whatever conferences and stuff won't make a difference until we go to the ground level. We make a common ground for everyone, sit down, try to make policies and implement it, because there are so many policies we have gone through. We are not less of any country in making policies, but we are not implementing it. The first reason we gave for not implementing is we don't have resources. Okay, we don't have resources from 47. So what should we do now? So I think what I saw, observed on the plastic ban in Islamabad was the best thing, that they started finding people. And I saw the change of behavior when they started to find people, because the main concern about a layman is money, and he don't want to take any risk. So I think what we have suggested to the government officials we have met is like start finding people. Fridays for Future is demonstrating its type of different for international, but we can help you. We can spot you out things that they are happening bad, but again, due to lack of resources, we have been trying to spot so many things and trying to share with the government, but again, no response. I know it's really hard for them to even look after everything. So what are we are doing now is, last month we went to Gilgit Baltistan. Instead of doing demonstration in summer vacations, we went to GB. We had 3 to 4 camps on climate literacy in different part of Gilgit Baltistan. And the best thing was that when we were in Gilgit, it is an unplanned city. It is a total mess. We have seen it. Nothing is been done there. Every waste is going into the river is flowing there. When we went to the Gizar area, the Yasin Valley, which is very, very beautiful, people are starting to, having experienced the, results of climate change. They are facing, so even they also link suicide rate with climate change. The suicide rate in Gilgit Baltistan is so much high. There are many factors, because they say climate also plays a factor, that there is a lack of communication level in Gilgit Baltistan between a child and a parents, and what we saw, that parents are very concerned. They are asking many organizations to intervene and try to tell the children about what's happening around the world. The communication level is very low, and the only organization we saw there was Aga Khan Development Network working. So, and I don't think so that it's they can alone do it. but they are doing good. So the education level is almost up to 100% there, 95 to 100%, but they are facing so many problems that even when they shift from the river bank to upper side of that, they face so many problems. And they share two cases with us that a girl suicide because of getting away from where she used to live because of her friends. And after 3 to 4 months, because the parents were not listening to her, she actually suicided. And the main problem there is, like, the day before yesterday she is really happy, and the next day she suicides. And you don't know what's happening here, because they never observe anything bad doing the behavior of that. So yeah, so I think the river banks, and especially in Hunza, if you have gone through the commercialization of Hunza, is actually hurting the environment. And even the children want to have a good environment, they want to contribute. The adults there, the government there is not playing their part. So we have seen that if we go through this process, we might not be able to do what we are discussing right here right now. So I think 11 year is not enough. We might need more than 15 to 20 years. So if the international panel on climate change they says that we don't have time, so I think we have already gone out of time, the countries like Pakistan. So I don't think Pakistan needs to make policies. We need to start implementing policies with full force.
Thank you for highlighting those.
Sort of have a
anecdotes.
question
So,
from her later at the end.
yes,
Okay.
we'll come back, we'll come to questions at the end. Um, so thank you for alluding to the technical and human capacity gaps that we have, and also highlighting the social aspects of climate change. And so we already know that people are walking in Sindh. There have been marches in Sindh in terms of the sea level rise and how that's impacting water supplies in, s- in places like Thatta and Badin, and that's having an impact on the psyche of the people there. So no wonder that even in Gilgit you found some similarity. So there is some potential for research there too. And I'm coming to you. Just briefly talk about how things are coming together for this march. I mean, how is it that in such a short period of time, Pakistanis have come in, and there are about 20 or 21 cities and towns that are coming together. How are you guys coordinating? What's going into that? What are some of the good things that you found? What are some of the hurdles that you're facing in terms of coordinating and putting things together?
So I think till 2 days ago there are 22 cities all over Pakistan, and I think one thing that I really, because I wasn't expecting such a huge response. So in 2015 I organized a climate march. It was called Climate March before, and it used to happen before the COP, the Conference of Parties, to put pressure on government, like international government, to before, I think I organized it before the Paris Agreement. And at that time I think we had one in Karachi and one in Islamabad, and it wasn't like, not a lot of people showed up. I asked one of my photographer friends to come, and he was like, nobody cares about the environment, I'll see if I have time, because I wanted him to cover it. And this time the response has been really good. Like for Islamabad we released a volunteer form because we really want to involve students and we wanted them to volunteer, and in 3 days we've had close to 100 people sign up to volunteer. It's on Friday, 3 p.m. Yeah, so 100, and they're all, most of them are 15 to 20-year-olds. So I'm really liking this, especially this, how Greta has brought this forward, like the energy that the young people have right now. And it's like all over the world, because especially when last year when the IPCC report came and they said we only have 12 years until catastrophic climate change, and nothing happened, and now we have 11 years and we still haven't. So a lot of young, that's what young people are saying, that we'll be what, like a 16-year-old would be not even be 30 in 11 years, and we're talking about a world which won't be livable. So young people are really into the movement. And also what we talked about, you're saying that there were marches happening in Sindh and regions like that, but I feel like they weren't getting the recognition they should have gotten. So cities like Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad, the good thing is, so because of them, because everyone wants to cover them, the small cities are also coming forward, and we're trying to, like, we have more resources, we have like people who are designing stuff, and we're making manifestos, and we're just going reaching out to them, and we're telling them that you're a university student, you, especially like students of environment or social sciences, and we're like, you know what this is, we have manifestos, we have designs, like we can help you with posters, we can help you with outreach, we just want, and you know this problem, so you just have to like organize a march, we'll help you with resources, like if we have links with journalists there, we'll connect you. But because in a lot of smaller cities, that's especially, they don't have resources and they can't get the bigger outreach. Because I think yesterday someone reached out to me from BBC Radio, I think it was Rina's contact, and they want to do a show on this in UK. And at first she said that, you know, I need footage from Lahore, Karachi, and Islam. But then I told her like a lot of other cities like Mardan is doing it, and Thatta is doing it, and Ghodki is doing a march. So I told her like, you know, they're the real ones being affected by climate change, and we really need to amplify their voices. As I said before, if there's a heat wave or it gets really hot, we're traveling in our cars with ACs, we're inside our house. We're not dependent on the environment for our livelihood. We work in offices. Like there are farmers and farming done, but not a lot. So we really need to amplify their voices, and that's what I'm saying. We reach out to them. We're trying to give them as much resources as we can, and it's been difficult. Like I'm constantly messaging. I'm asking like how to do a Facebook event and reaching out to people for media and doing that. But in the end, if because our objective is the same, and just 2 weeks of a lot of hard work, and we can actually achieve what we want to achieve. So it'll be good. Yeah.
Okay, so things are coming together, and people want to make a difference, right? So that's why. Before I come to the questions, I'm going to go back to Qasim for a few words as to how he's seeing things come together. You're at the farmers market every Saturday. There are a couple of meetings for the Islamabad group have happened there. How have you seen the energy in the young people? People have been coming up there, and they've been drawing these different charts to take up. And so I want to end on an optimistic note here, right? I told you I'm very pessimistic about the climate, and I remain that. But I think there is a lot of optimism in what the young people are doing. And then you talk in the video, you talked about your children, right? So is there any hope?
No, you know, the farmers markets and sort of these, you see a general increase in interest in agriculture, which is in itself, I think, a very positive thing, because we certainly need to arrest the downward trend of our agricultural sector. And it's very heartwarming to see a lot more young people now getting interested in farming. Especially at the farmers market as well. You know, lots of young people coming up to me and saying, you know, we want to start a market garden or a roof garden or our own sort of agribusiness online. We also had, of course, one of the poverty alleviation strategies was to keep sort of backyard poultry, which wasn't, you know, taken very well. But still, one of the at a policy level that was being introduced, and just in general, I think an increased awareness about how your food choices can make a big difference. You know, they say that your choices at the supermarket essentially have very much deeper, much more far-reaching effects. One of the things that Raina had written about in her article is about how she feels guilty about traveling on planes for all these climate change conferences. So, you know, it's again, it's about thinking on a personal level, that you notice now a lot more awareness about what we do and the footprint. So there's a footprint also. So sort of your food choices, what sort of effects that your food choices have. Now a lot more people, again, because again of policies about taxes on imported items, them becoming a lot more expensive. So everybody wants to eat local. Not only because the awareness is there, but because now it's just not more. I mean, it's a lot more economically sustainable. So you'll see a development of local supply chains as a result of these food choices that we're making on a personal level. So that is, I think, very encouraging to see that trend starting to gather a lot of pace, momentum. And I know that in our household also, we make a lot of now conscious decisions not to either eat less meat. You definitely want to eat vegetables, more vegetables. Eat fruits that are in season, that are local, that are not coming from far away, that don't have a lot of carbon miles on them. You definitely staying away from the imported stuff because it's so much more expensive. You want to make, with the plastic bag ban, everybody now with cloth bags, everybody making cloth bags, recycling cloth bags. So these are very positive actions that people are taking on a personal level. That I think, especially in the younger generation, is more. But having said that, I speak to a lot of people, older people who said that, ये हमारे ज़माने में भी होते थे, जैसे हम सारे वो टोकरी लेके सब्जी के लेने जाते थे. So somewhere in the middle, I don't know, we lost our way, and we're getting a lot more. जी बिल्कुल. This is, like I said, this is such more carbon neutral times. You are producing a lot less carbon, and definitely not absorbing as much as you were producing. So that's now something that, of course, the younger people have got to make conscious decisions about. Carbon tax, you were talking about earlier, about how if you put a tax on something, or if you make it more expensive, that has real effects. I think that's very good. But again, I think it's very tough on a personal level that every decision you make, if you have to think about the carbon footprint, that's something that even policymakers have struggled to deal with, because they say that it's very tough for the public for every time, so the water you drink, the food you eat, the clothes you're wearing, the how you're going to travel, your lifestyle. If you've got to think about each and every of those sort of acute decisions in this climate change context, it'll be very sort of stressful to live your life. So they have to have a carbon tax that I guess is gradually implemented, that will sort of just push, especially I think on an institutional level first, large corporations and institutions in the right direction. But I'm very optimistic also. I see a lot of positive things, and I think that's also one of the benefits of spending lots of time outdoors. You just tend to feel a lot better.
Thank you. So we've been joined by Anab Zaib, who's a climate expert, and Anam, we've been talking about the youth movement and mitigation and adaptation, and what the world needs to do, what Pakistan needs to do. But we're about to go to the questions, but before we do that, I'd like your take on one particular issue. So Pakistan has a water policy, climate policy. So we've had one since 2012. We've got a climate change framework as well. Is that being implemented? If not, how do you see us moving forward? I know there's a new renewable energy policy coming up. We're doing a number of things. So where do you see us, especially after our nationally determined contributions come out next year vis-a-vis the Paris Climate Agreement?
Thank you, Dr. Imran. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry if I repeat anything that's already been said. I'm a little late. In terms of policies, before I get into that, I don't know if this has been covered or not, but after listening to what Qasim says, everything that he's highlighted about the way we interact with materials in our day-to-day lives, with the plastic, with the food that we eat, with our outdoor environment, with our transport, it is essential for us as individuals, and especially those of us that are aware of it, to curb our emissions and curb our individual plastic footprint, our individual water footprint. By all means, turn off the tap when you're brushing your teeth. All of these things should be common practice. But if we think that this is the solution to the climate problem, it isn't. Number one, this is an environment problem. All of these things are excellent. I try to implement them as well. But climate change is something that is very different from environment. And unfortunately, most of the time, our policymakers or our spokespeople get this wrong as well. You know, cleaning up plastic pollution from the streets, maybe in 30 years, when we reduce our emissions from plastic pollution and that has an impact on the temperature, it may become a climate issue. But at the moment, reducing plastic pollution is an environment issue. It's not a climate issue yet. Climate is something that impacts the changes in temperature and the climate of the area. So let's be very clear about what the difference between environment and climate is. It is unfair for governments and corporations to make us believe, as individuals and as civil society, that we are responsible for climate change and to put the burden on us as individuals. We're not responsible. It's the big companies that are producing bottled water that are the actual culprits. They're taking a free resource and they're selling it to us in harmful plastic packaging. So let's not kid ourselves by turning off the tap every time we brush our teeth. We will save a little bit of water, but it's not like that water is going to go back into the system and it's going to go to someone who needs the water. Corporations are responsible for the exploitation. Corporations and governments, the bad decisions made by the government, and then the bad decisions made by the corporations who are out there to make money due to the capitalist system are the ones to blame. I think we can discuss this in the question and answer session, what I have to say. Coming back to the policy, Pakistan has had a national climate change policy since 2012. Incidentally, around the same time that the devolution, the 18th Amendment to the Constitution of Pakistan happened. Maybe it was a little bit too early. The devolution hasn't happened in its true form even to date. But that policy was very much written by a group of experts in Islamabad based on a task force report. The policy reads a lot more like a wish list of things that we should be doing rather than an actual policy. Again, I think I have a controversial opinion about most things, but I also think that having development sector policies is truly a developing country phenomenon. I tried very hard to find a national climate change policy for some of our developed countries. I couldn't find it. At the most, I can find white papers for each country, but there is no policy document for climate change in most countries other than Pakistan or Nepal or India or our kind of countries that are feeling the impacts but are also and it generally comes under donor pressure as well. The certain agencies want us to capitalize on this and produce our own policies. Similarly, we also came up with a national implementation framework. We've submitted an NDC to the government, to the UNFCCC, which is a commitment to keep our emissions at a certain level so that we can, meet the 1.5 degree temperature increase thing. At the same time, Pakistan last year came up with its first national water policy. This time, there was not really too much of an excuse for this policy to be made completely at the federal level. There were some supposed consultations at the provincial level, but the provinces at the largest level there should not be a federal water policy to begin with. Water is a subject that is for the provinces. It always has been, and somehow our policies have jumbled it up that it's become a national level issue. What we're asking in this march, while one of our key demands in the manifesto for Pakistan in this march is that we demand a review of the national climate change policy, we demand more transparent information and accountability as to how it's being implemented. Citizens should know how much progress has been achieved, how much hasn't been achieved. We have the right to know this as citizens of Pakistan. But yet again, I don't know how many of you may have noticed, a certain donor agency has advertised a consultancy for the review of the national climate change policy again. So how inclusive this process will be and how quickly it's going to be done, how much it's actually going to take into account what the provinces actually want, what backward communities or communities living in the rural areas actually need, is a question that we're going to, it's a big question mark at this point. So one of the key messages that the Climate March is saying is that as citizens, we should know more about our policies, and the policies should be citizen-based and citizen-led. So I'll close with that, and we can move forward.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. That they need to be all inclusive, and we need to go through the process by incorporating the suggestions and the findings from what's happening on the ground, rather than just sitting in closed rooms and coming up with what we think are important points to be addressed. So there were some questions. We'll start with you, then we'll come to you, sir, and then we'll go back there, and then we'll come to you. So we'll take three at a time. आपसे एक लेंगे आपसे एक लेंगे
Okay, fair enough. So my first question is, for the only and the first question is with Ma'am Raina, which is basically that you talked about all the actions that we could, you talked about all the threats that we're facing because of climate change and all the little actions that we're taking because of that. But since how those little actions are little and we need to do more, we are going to the international arenas and we're trying to, because that's the only option that we have. So my question is basically hypothetical in nature, and that sort of like scares me to the point that what if, since we have only 11 to 12 years, and what if we actually go to those arenas and it's not really working out? We try our best, we're giving, you know, all the possible solutions that we could possibly go forward with, but those are not really being implemented because there are big global players who are more profit oriented, because of which, you know, these policies and everything are not really working in those arenas. And hypothetically speaking, imagine if Donald Trump comes into the play in the next elections as well. So what do we do in that case? And I need to like sort of relate this with another analogy, which is sort of like political in context and controversial in context, but we see what's happening in Kashmir right now, right? And you and the organization that you're talking about is basically they themselves acknowledge the problems that are going on in there, yet those are only statements and they're not really doing anything about it because they are big global players. India is a big global market. So just the same way, he talked about one of the stat, which is that 100 of the companies, there are 100 companies which are basically 70% of those 100 companies are producing all the carbon in the world, right? So if those are big players enough to not let all those organizations work, what do we do in that specific context? We don't even have the time.
Okay, thank you. We'll take your point, sir.
Yeah, I have a comment. Good presentations, good summaries, but I think we missed one very important thing. And I'm saying this because I've been involved with nuclear power, I've been involved with science and technology, and I've been involved with electricity generation in my various appointments in the Atomic Energy Commission, Ministry of Science and Technology, and Planning Commission. You have identified that burning fuel is the major cause of climate change all over the world, burning anything. And you did not mention that in addition to burning fuel for generation of electricity, we also burn fuel in vehicles, in transport, and therefore we should stop burning fuel over there and burning coal over here, burning oil over here in the vehicle.
Burning of fossil fuels.
Fossil fuel.
That are used in cars as
right.
well.
So I think I'll just say a few things. We did not talk about nuclear power, which does not involve burning fuels. So we should have more nuclear power. And it is safe also. It is
Waste,
safe.
it's
Yeah.
the waste that we're worried about.
Right. No, waste is not a problem. Go to Karachi nuclear power plant, and it has been operating for 47 years.
Let's have a separate one on this, please.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to
No,
discuss this in this.
No, but I'm talking about fuel generation. Let me finish. If you go to Karachi nuclear power plant, it's been operating for 47. The fuel, that waste that is there, is in a pool which is less than the size of this room. जो दूसरा पॉइंट ये है, we did not talk about peak rate at all. Pakistan Council for Renewable Energies. When I was Secretary Science and Technology, I increased its budget by 4 or 5 times. I was talking to somebody yesterday and he says it is dead. It is a dead organization. And at that time, this was in 2008, we set up a solar panel manufacturing small plant over there. But then solar panels started being manufactured in China in very huge plants, So economically we could not, but we should talk about, there should have been PCRET represented over here. Its name is Renewable Energy and Technology, right? And about cars, the future is of electric cars. And when we have electric cars, we'll need more electricity. We will avoid burning oil, but we will have to generate electricity. And therefore, I think this electricity generation by solar panels and by nuclear power is very important to fight climate change.
Thank you. And then at the back, sir, we'll come to you in a second.
Thank you. This is for all of you here, not to our experts in particular, but those of you who are pledging to go to the march. Here are a few slogans that my British Pakistani friend Addie came up with, and she's making banners, and you can do some too. Here are the slogans. Planet over profit. We can also shout them as we march. Planet over profit. You can ignore us, but you will regret it. You can ignore us, but you will regret it. Not bad. Another one. Nature doesn't need people. People need nature. Nature doesn't need people. People need nature. Right? Last one. Systems change, not climate change. System change, not climate change. So she's making some banners, and she's looking for masks. She would like those sort of rebellious kind of masks. You know the ones that she's making masks. So anybody?
Believe me, those who attend these COPs all suffer from anxiety and frustration, and in fact we call it a talk shop, and then I know some journalists who dropped out and said, how many times do we attend these negotiations, and how many times you write the same story in a different way. So there is a lot of frustration, but it was always supposed to be leading to something, right? We almost got there at Copenhagen. That was in 2009, I believe, and we almost got there, but at the last minute, the talks it collapsed. The summit collapsed, and then we regrouped, and we, meaning the world, regrouped and came back and decided that Paris would be the deadline, and we did meet the deadline. It wasn't a perfect agreement by any means, but it was an agreement, and it's the only way to get everyone together. So the framework was, the goal was decided. What do we as a global community want? We don't want to go above 2 degrees pursuant to 1.5. And we put in 1.5. Why did we, meaning all of us, meaning our representatives, why did we put it in 1.5? Because the small island states were saying that we will not survive 2 degrees because of sea level rise, then we will no longer exist as nations, Maldives and the Pacific Islanders. So we put in 1.5 pursuant to 1.5. And so the goal was decided. Now, how do we get from here to there? That was the framework, and that was left for further negotiations, and let's get everybody involved, and now everyone has a stake, everyone has to be responsible. Trump pulling out was a terrible blow to the Paris Agreement. When it was announced, in fact, there was global negotiations going on at Marrakesh. It was the Marrakesh COP, and actually people broke down in the hallways and they were crying because, especially the American negotiators. So, Trump does not speak for all Americans, right? And they were crying because this was years and years of their painstaking work that they knew that Trump would just tear to shreds, which he has done by pulling them out. Obama put in a clause that they cannot exit Paris until the next president. So if he is re-elected and if he pulls out, then We can only hope, but that's why I stress that we should focus on our adaptation as a priority, which is amongst one of the demands that it should be district level adaptation in Pakistan that we are asking for during the march. Climate change is a bit different from the Kashmir issue, is because everybody is involved. Every single country is suffering. Like I said, even the U.S. is suffering. And a couple of years ago, I remember being frustrated by these talks, and one of my trainers, he worked in London. He was a British climate specialist, and he said to me, Raina, when a few hurricanes slam into New York City, that's when the Americans will wake up. That's where the rich people live. That's where the powerful, and New York is like Manhattan is like the most powerful city in the world. That's when they'll wake up, and it happened. Just after that, Sandy happened, and there was a near miss as well. And so it's just a matter of time. Once it starts hitting, and it is between it's wealthy nations and poor nations. Then it's wealthy elites, and then people who are not, so Dorian right now missed them. It hit Bahamas, totally flattened the Bahamas, but it missed Florida, it missed even North Carolina didn't really get a big hit. So, but that was just one hurricane. The season is just starting. The season starts in September. So wait and see. It's just a matter of time. I mean, and I just came back from the U.S. I went after many years, and believe me, whatever they might be denying at the national level or in international forums, district level, they are preparing. Every single district, I mean, I don't know what you call them, state level, and they call them every region of the U.S. I mean, I went to California, I went to Texas, they are all preparing for climate change. So they are all getting ready. They're calling it, weatherproofing their nation, and they're getting ready.
Right, and there's a new research out that says that the Republicans who did not believe in who have historically not believed in climate change, the younger generation is believing it more and more and are in line with the Democrats. So the future does look bright, but for the near future is disturbing vis-a-vis Trump. So we've got two questions here, one sir, and then we'll come to you, and then you.
Who takes any measurements or data in Pakistan? Nobody. I'll tell you why. I'm the author of this document, Renewable Energy Profile of the OIC countries. I discuss many aspects, climate change, renewable energy, what it really costs, and is it really renewable in the long term, or including nuclear power, for which I have some reservations, but that's another thing. Nobody takes any data in Pakistan. I tried very hard. Tell me what is the temperature profile of the last 10 years or 20 years or 30 years? No records. What about precipitation? And not just precipitation, violent precipitation, gentle precipitation. It makes a whole lot of difference. So this kind of data, first of all, let's do some data keeping. Number one. Number two, but climate change is not restricted to one area, 1 square kilometer or 10, it's over large areas. I have a photograph with me, a satellite image, January 2011. And this shows the, let's say, pollution map or the over this part of the world, and you can see the spouts, the little things starting off, the pinpoints from places, coal-fired plants in India, Patna right up to West Bengal, coming up, broadening out, very intense yellow becoming broad, white, sort of coverage right up to the Indus and going down to Multan. So this is what happens in Lahore in December, January, and February, those 3 months. It's coming from India. I'm not saying they're the culprit, because climate change or the pollution spreads over areas, not one country.
Actually, the Food and Agriculture Organization just did a study, and they discovered that most of the emissions in Lahore coming from vehicular emissions were the number one, and then the crops and so.
I can share those pictures with you. Anyway, talked about water and water table going down. We forget one important fact. When the Indus Basin Treaty was designed, to which we signed up, and signed off 3 of our eastern rivers, it was based on the assumption of 75% cropping intensity. Last year, we exceeded 160%. Okay? So it comes back to another thing, too many people. Population, number one. Number two, everybody, our electricity availability or consumption per capita is about 600 units per person per year. It's about more than 3,300 in Malaysia. If you want to aim for that sort of growth level, economic level, you've got to generate 6 times more electricity. So electricity generation, the electrification of our economy and electrification all over the world, this is what's part of the problem. And one of the biggest polluters, coal is the cheapest, quickest to implement, but others. And please, this is going to happen. There will be more power plants in Pakistan. There will be more pollution now, homegrown, home emission, local emissions. But renewable energy is not an answer also. Look at renewable energy, solar panels or wind. Yeah, I think sorry?
Biofuel.
Biofuel, I support that entirely, but I'm talking
Water
about
fusion.
fusion. I've been waiting for it for the last 50 years, hasn't
A
happened.
Pakistani engineer and his son manufactured a car in Pakistan at least
Runs
2
on water.
decades ago.
Which runs on
and
water?
sold it. In the end, it went to NASA. Nobody would develop it here.
Runs on what?
They, a father and son in Pakistan, there's a newspaper clipping I discovered, they created a vehicle, they converted a car engine from petrol to water. And water,
I'm sorry.
solar panel,
I'm
solar
sorry.
battery, and they emitted pure oxygen
That was
and burned the carbon.
that article was tongue in the cheek. It's embarrassing for me to know that somebody can even take this seriously. Please don't mind my
It was
saying.
in your
No,
newspaper.
it's terrible. It's terrible.
2 decades ago.
But anyway.
Sold to the Japanese and on to NASA.
No, it wasn't. Sorry.
Sir, last point, sir, before we go
I
back.
want to make a couple of points because, as she rightly pointed out, environmental concerns and climate concerns may be different, but they will merge after some time. And you don't know where the environment ends and climate begins, the problem. I do not think that 1.5 degrees centigrade will be achievable by 2030. It won't happen. 2 degrees, certainly not. Renewable energy, it takes power to produce solar cells. And they're very energy intensive, very energy intensive. Has anybody done a life cycle analysis? It's available in this report. You can go on the ComSec website. It's free. Download it. Read it there. All the data is there. It's available. So renewable energy, what about batteries? Have you thought about the life cycle of batteries? Hybrid cars, okay. Electric cars, sorry. Oh, electric cars have something to do with Afghanistan. If you don't know what it is, if I had Afghanistan, I'd never let it go. It is the Saudi Arabia of lithium. It has more than 50% of the world's lithium in Afghanistan. I would never let go of it. It's important. But if you look at the entire holistic cycle, if you look at the timelines and so on, levelized cost of electricity generation, or how much storage you can take in a battery, how do you handle old batteries? Electronic waste. It's a new word coming up, e-waste and so on. What will happen there? So there's no easy solution, but there is one. We have to change our lifestyles. 20 degrees centigrade is the temperature on the air conditioners. Why? In my office, I retired a year ago. It used to be 22. I raised it to 26, saved 30% of the electricity bill. Simple. So don't put on a tie. The Japanese have 27 degrees in their offices. And they say, okay, take off your jacket. You don't have to wear a jacket or a tie. You save electricity, save emissions, power generation. So a lot of things can happen. I've been painting my roof white, somebody mentioned that, for the last 27, 28 years. And in the summer, of course, with the rains, the heavy rains, it can get damaged. I'll do it again now, next month.
Okay.
3 to 4 degrees lowering of temperature. A lot of little things we can do.
Thank you,
But
sir.
we've got to change our lifestyle.
Anam, you want to take up any of the queries?
The immediate point, just also to reroute back to the climate march. I think we're digressing a little bit. We want to stick to why we're marching and specifics about the march. We have a Pakistan-wide manifesto for the climate march. If any of you are following our social media, we've been putting up excerpts from the climate march on our Twitter and our Facebook. The document, actually, I don't know if we've uploaded it yet, but I have uploaded it on a website, so I can share that link. It's on change.org, but we can also, I think it's probably change.org, but I'll share it. Sorry, our website is functional now. It's climateaction.pk. you'll be able to read the Pakistan-wide manifesto there. Now, similarly, the cities have been coming up with their city-specific demands also. So, that might answer your question to some extent. Now, coming back to the same thing, which might also address some of the questions or the comments that were made by others about my insistence on differentiating between environment and climate. Air pollution is an environmental problem. Air pollution, yes, is caused by emissions from vehicular transport or from, industries, whatever, you want to say. But the mechanisms to deal with both are entirely different. And yes, the individual has a lot of power. My favorite saying is, I always wondered why someone didn't do anything about that, and then I realized someone was me. That's my favorite thing. I apply it to every aspect of my life. But in terms of, and that's why people to this day have not been coming out in Pakistan on the roads to protest about climate change, is because we don't know what to do. I think you pointed that out, that it seems like a mammoth sort of task, that what can I do about climate change? It's because you will never see the results for another 30 or 40 years. You keep saying you're going to be 75 by 2030. We won't see any results by 2030. We're going to see any results, they're going to be after 2050. A lot of us won't even, be alive by then. Yes. Yes, of course. So civil society, as well as making changes on the individual level, the role of civil society in this whole thing, and this is primarily why we're marching, the role of civil society is that we do recognize that climate change, environment is an individual issue, climate change is not. Climate change is something that our government and that corporations have to change the way that they operate. Our population growth has to change. Our government has to adopt better policies. Our government has to align itself with countries other than the G77, countries that are part of a better negotiating bloc when they go to the UNFCCC negotiations. That will make us be in a stronger position to negotiate our position and to access finance for our requirements. At the end of the day, we are a country that's suffering. We are not a big emitter. We do not emit enough carbon at the moment for it to be a big deal that the ACs are running on 20. And if you think that if we turn off these ACs, this electricity is going to go to someone who needs it, it's not. That's because the system is not right. The system is inequitable. The system doesn't have equality. So don't think that, making minor changes on your level or that you turn off the tap, that's going to make a difference in a poor farmer's life in Gotki. It's not. Okay, let's just be clear about that. The change that's needed is the system change. Do this by all means. This is an environmental thing. You can make this change at an individual level. Do it. I just to be clear, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying do it. But it's a different issue from climate change. Climate change requires a system change. It requires a policy change. These changes are very important. So, coming back to the climate march. We are marching because the role of civil society, now that all of us know about this issue, the role of civil society is, we're going to march so that we tell our government that we want you to do better. We're marching so that we tell corporations that their behavior is unacceptable at the Pakistan level. We're also marching to show the world that we want world leaders to stay true to their commitments. These are the three primary reasons we're marching. The manifesto and the demands other than this are then a little bit more detailed, but these are the primary reasons. And this is the true role of citizens when it comes to climate change. When it comes to environment, everything that all of you have mentioned are, of course, very relevant. But when it comes to climate change, we are a pressure group, and we have to pressurize our government and our corporations.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to add a point that we should stop holding ordinary people responsible for climate change. Because if you talk about developing countries or poor people, they already recycle. They walk, because poor people, they can't afford cars. They don't eat that much meat because meat is expensive. They eat vegetables. So because of this march, we want to put pressure on the real culprits. There are, as I said before, there are 100 companies that produce 70% of the world's carbon. So by this march, having a conscious lifestyle is really important. We're doing something at micro level. But if you talk about climate change, we are not responsible for it. We're just being affected. So that's what we're doing in this march. We're putting pressure on international government to look at the real culprits, like how industrialization and capitalism has caused this major catastrophe. Thank you.
So I just wanted to address your last about putting pressure on the international. How do you influence the negotiation? So, and just her thing about climate change and environment rights. So with environmental issues like water scarcity, loss of biodiversity, deforestation, so there's this feeling in rich countries that once you develop and you become wealthier, you will then, like in Germany, they've restored all their forests, many of their forests that were destroyed during the war, and deforestation took place, and they've replanted their forests, they've grown their forests. So there's that feeling that once you reach that level of prosperity, you will tackle, you will, in air pollution, like in Japan, the air is completely clean, the rivers are completely clean, yet Japan was devastated after the Second World War, and there were 2 nuclear explosions. Anyhow, but coming back to climate change, is that this is the feeling of that we are like driving on a road and there's a cliff, and we will soon go over the cliff. As humanity, like all of us human beings on this planet, we will go over the cliff, and then no one will be spared, rich or poor or whoever, whatever might be. So that is there's a question of time limit, and that's why the climate movement has sort of superseded the environmental movement, and the environmental movement has sort of come under the climate change cloud because it's a much bigger, heavier, more threatening cloud, and that's why. And the thing is that we're running out of time. Before we go over the cliff, we have 12 years, some say 1.5 is more than enough. Some say if we can't, forget 2 degrees, 1.5, it's going to be over for most people. So that's why there is a time limit. So that's just the difference that I think what Anam was trying to say, and just trying to explain it to you in an easier way. And for you, how do we put pressure? I think that's where we come into play. If citizens all over the world can galvanize and mobilize together and come out on the streets and pressurize their political leaders, they cannot, because that's how you vote. I mean, we also vote. We are a democracy after all, and so is the US, so is, most of the European countries. China isn't. It's a little bit of a different example, but still they recognize, because they say it's for the betterment of our own people. We have to cut air pollution because it's good for our people. So we are marching in solidarity with the world, and we're trying to put pressure on global leaders, and especially the leaders of these economies. There are like 15 economies that I mentioned earlier who have created 90% of the emissions, and we want to pressurize them to do something. And so now it's because of the internet, because of better communication, everybody can be involved in this movement.
Okay, and just want to add to it that it's not only the US. There was a time when the Western countries were largely to blame, but now it's India and China. These 2 countries are right up there. And we know for a fact that there are coal power plants coming up in China right now, in India as well. So it has to be a collective action. Anam, you want to have
quick, because I have to leave because I have to pick someone up. I just wanted to say thank you everyone for all of your interest in coming here. Just want to invite you to please record a video and upload it on social media about why you want to march. It will be very helpful for our movement, and we will retweet it and share it. Second thing is, we are going to be making posters and banners and placards, and you're all invited. We'll share the event link on Twitter. So anyone who's in Islamabad and who wants to make banners and posters with us, please join us. We'd love to have you there.